The rain in Seattle doesn't just fall, it clings. It felt like a second skin as I stood outside the Gilded Rose, a bistro tucked away in a cobblestone corner of the city where people go when they don't want to be found. The air was thick with the scent of wet asphalt and expensive roasting coffee, but all I could smell was the metallic tang of my own fear. I was a ghost in a charcoal overcoat, watching my life dissolve through a fogged-up pane of glass. Inside, the amber light caught the gold of the wedding band I'd polished every morning for 12 years. A ritual of devotion that now felt like a mockery. But it wasn't my hand she was holding. It was his. My wife, Elena, a woman I thought I knew better than my own reflection, was leaning in, her laughter silent behind the glass, but visible in the way her shoulders shook with a rhythmic, easy grace. She looked younger, more alive, more like the woman I'd met in a gallery in Chicago a lifetime ago. And the man across from her, a man I'd never seen before, was tracing the lines of her palm like he was reading a map to a treasure he'd already stolen. My heart wasn't just breaking, it was being dismantled bolt by bolt, as I realized that the emergency board meetings and site visits were all just cover for this quiet, tender betrayal. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the cold seeping into my bones, realizing that every late night at the office and weekend retreat with the girls had been a brick in the wall she was building between us. The streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the pavement, mirroring the distortion of my own reality. I was the man who built skyscrapers, yet I couldn't even see the collapse of my own front door. To truly understand how I ended up on that rain-slicked sidewalk, shivering under the weight of a truth I wasn't ready to carry, you have to understand the life I thought I had built. My name is David Miller. I'm a structural engineer by trade, a man who deals in the physics of stability. I spend my days calculating loads, stress points, and the integrity of steel beams. I ensure that things stay upright, that foundations remain solid, and that the weight of the world doesn't crush the people living inside the structures I design. There's a cruel irony in that, isn't there? While I was busy checking the blueprints of massive skyscrapers in downtown Portland and ensuring the seismic safety of bridges in Olympia, the foundation of my own home was rotting from the inside out. Elena was a landscape architect. She dealt in the aesthetic, in the way things look on the surface. She knew how to plant flowers to hide a cracked retaining wall. She knew how to use lighting to make a hollow space feel warm. We met at a charity gala 15 years ago, a night filled with champagne and promises, and I thought we were the perfect build. We had the house in the upscale suburbs of Bellevue, the golden retriever named Jasper, who slept at the foot of our bed. On my end, a domestic rhythm that I mistook for permanent stability. We had Sunday brunches and shared Google calendars. But looking back now, through the lens of family secrets and revenge, the cracks were everywhere. The way she'd tilt her phone screen toward the floor when a text notification chimed at 10 p.m. The way her scent changed from the soft vanilla lily perfume I bought her every Christmas to something sharper, muskier, and unfamiliar. I chose to ignore it. I chose to believe the lies because the alternative, the structural failure of my marriage, was a weight I wasn't prepared to calculate. The first real sign, the one I can't believe I talked myself out of, happened exactly 3 months ago. I'd managed to finish a site visit in Olympia several hours early. The weather was unusually clear, and I felt a rare surge of romantic spontaneity. I stopped at that high-end Italian deli she loves, picking up imported olives, aged prosciutto, and a bottle of wine that cost more than my first set of drafting tools. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to be the husband who still moved her. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was there, glinting under the porch light. The house was silent, save for the low rhythmic hum of the central air. I called her name as I set the groceries on the marble island, but there was no response. I walked upstairs, my footsteps muffled by the thick hallway runner. That's when I heard it, the low murmur of a voice coming from our master bedroom. It wasn't Elena's. It was a man's voice, deep and resonant, vibrating with a confidence that made the hair on my neck stand up. I froze at the doorway, the heavy glass bottle of wine still in my hand. She was sitting at her mahogany vanity, her back to the door, draped in a silk robe I'd never seen before, a deep, bruised purple. She was laughing, a sound so intimate, so devoid of the usual domestic fatigue that it felt like a physical blow to my solar plexus. She was looking into her laptop screen, her fingers tracing the edge of the camera. When she caught my reflection in the mirror, her face didn't crumble into guilt. It hardened into a mask of professional irritation. She closed the laptop with a sharp click and spun around, a practiced smile fixing itself onto her lips. "David, you're early," she said, her voice as steady as a surgeon's. She told me it was a Zoom consultation with a high-profile client in New York, a man named Julian who was difficult but lucrative. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe that my life wasn't a lie. But the air in that room felt heavy with the ozone of a secret I couldn't yet name. A week after the New York client incident, the doubt became a living thing inside me. It felt like a parasite, feeding on my sleep and my focus. I found myself staring at blueprints at work, seeing not floor plans, but the gaps in Elena's stories. I did something then that I am not proud of, something that marks the end of innocence in any relationship. I waited until she was in the shower, the steam masking the sound, and I went through her phone. It's a desperate, pathetic move, isn't it? The kind of thing you see in movies and think, I'd never stoop that low. But when your world is tilting, you reach for anything to steady yourself. I found nothing. No suspicious texts, no hidden call logs, no provocative photos. The phone was pristine, and that was the biggest red flag of all. In the modern world, nobody's digital life is that clean unless they are scrubbing it with industrial-strength bleach every single night. That's when the engineer in me took over. I realized I wasn't dealing with a simple lapse in judgment. I was dealing with a professional-grade deception. I reached out to an old contact from my college days, a guy named Marcus who had left engineering for discrete digital forensics. We met at a greasy spoon diner in Tacoma, far away from anyone who might recognize the successful David Miller. I felt like a criminal just sitting in that booth. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Have you ever felt that gut instinct that something was wrong, even when everything looked perfect on the surface? Marcus listened to me stumble through my suspicions. He didn't judge. He'd seen the wreckage of 1,000 marriages. He told me that if Elena was using encrypted apps, burner accounts, or ghost folders, we'd have to go analog. He told me I needed to follow the paper trail, or better yet, follow the woman. The following Tuesday provided the perfect opportunity. Elena stood in the kitchen that morning, sipping her kale smoothie, and told me she had a grueling late-night meeting with the city planning board regarding the new waterfront development. She even showed me the agenda on her iPad. I nodded, kissed her cheek, tasting only the cold green juice, and told her I'd likely be working late on the bridge project too. It was a dance of shadows. Instead of going to my office, I went to a car rental agency near the airport. I didn't want my silver SUV spotted. I rented a nondescript Ford Taurus, a dad car, in a faded blue that blended into the background of any street. I sat in that car 2 blocks from her office building, watching the glass and steel entrance through a pair of binoculars I usually use for surveying land. At 5:30 p.m., the lobby doors swung open. Elena emerged, but she wasn't the woman who had left the house that morning. Gone was the charcoal blazer and the sensible flats. She changed into a silk red dress, the one she'd worn to our 10th anniversary, and the one she knew I loved because of the way it moved when she walked. I followed her through the grueling gridlock of evening traffic, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, the cheap plastic of the rental car creaking under my grip. She didn't head toward City Hall. She didn't even head toward the waterfront development. She wove through the city, heading toward a historic district I rarely visited. She parked in a dark paid lot near the old pier and walked with a purpose, a predatory elegance I hadn't seen in years. She disappeared into the Gilded Rose. I sat in the Taurus for 5 minutes, my breath fogging the windshield, listening to the rain hammer against the roof like 1,000 tiny nails. Then I stepped out into the night, and I walked into the restaurant with the gait of a man who had already died. The chime above the heavy oak door was drowned out by the low, sultry swell of a live jazz trio and the sophisticated clinking of silverware against fine china. The hostess, a young woman with a polite, rehearsed smile, stepped forward to greet me. "Table for one, sir?" she asked. I didn't even look at her. I brushed past her, my eyes scanning the room like a radar. I wasn't David the husband anymore. I was a man on a mission of absolute scorched earth self-destruction. I moved through the shadows of the dining room, my charcoal coat dripping water onto the polished hardwood. I wove between tables of happy couples, families celebrating graduations, and businessmen closing deals. None of them saw me. I was invisible, a ghost haunting the banquet of my own betrayal. And then, there she was, Elena. She was tucked into a semi-private booth in the far corner, her face illuminated by a single, flickering candle. I walked up to the table unnoticed. I stood just 3 feet away, shielded by a large decorative fern that cast jagged shadows over the scene. I watched, my heart thundering in my ears like a physical weight, as she reached across the white linen tablecloth. She took his hand, the man from the mirror, the New York client. She took his hand and held it to her cheek, her eyes closing in a look of pure, unadulterated peace. I watched her thumb stroke his knuckles in a specific, rhythmic way she used to do to me when we were first dating, back when we were young and broke and believed in forever. "I can't wait for us to be clear of him," she whispered. The jazz music seemed to die in the air. Her voice was like a serrated knife. "David is a good man, Julian, but he's stagnant. He doesn't see the world the way we do. He's a builder of cages, not a seeker of horizons." Julian, the man with the silver hair and the expensive watch, smiled. It was a cold, predatory expression. "Soon, Elena. The paperwork is almost ready. Once the final transfer clears, David Miller will be nothing more than a footnote in your history." I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table or grab Julian by his silk tie. In my line of work, if a building is failing, you don't start by swinging a sledgehammer. You study the collapse. I simply stepped out from behind the jagged shadows of the decorative fern and pulled out the empty mahogany chair at the head of their table. The screech of the chair legs against the polished hardwood floor was like a gunshot in the quiet, jazz-filled room. Several diners at nearby tables paused, forks halfway to their mouths, sensing the sudden shift in the room's atmospheric pressure. Elena's eyes went wide, not the wide of surprise, but the wide of a prey animal, realizing the trap has snapped shut. The color drained from her face in a sickening wave until she was as white as the linen napkins. Julian, however, didn't flinch. He just leaned back, his thumb still resting on Elena's hand, and looked at me with a bored, almost clinical curiosity. It was the look of a man who had bought and sold people like me for breakfast. "Nah, the steak is excellent here, or so I've heard," I said, my voice sounding strangely hollow, as if it were coming from someone else entirely. I looked directly at Julian, noting the way the candlelight reflected in his cold gray eyes. "I'm David, the stagnant husband, the footnote, and you must be the paperwork expert." Elena tried to speak, her hand trembling so violently that she knocked over her half-full glass of Pinot Noir. The red wine bled across the white tablecloth, a dark spreading stain that looked like an arterial spray. "David, this isn't what it looks like. We were just discussing a project, a new development in the valley." I laughed, a harsh, dry sound that felt like sandpaper in my throat. "A project? Is that what we're calling it now? Does the project involve destroying a 15-year marriage? Or is that just a fringe benefit of the new horizons you're seeking? If you were in my shoes, David's shoes, standing there watching the person you love most admit you're a hurdle to be cleared, what would you do? Would you walk away, or would you sit down at that table?" Share your thoughts in the comments. Part 8. The reveal of the paperwork. Julian finally spoke, and his voice was exactly what I expected. Smooth, curated, and entirely devoid of empathy. "Mr. Miller, let's not make a scene. I understand this is an emotional moment for a man of your temperament, but Elena and I have been planning this transition for some time. It's better this way, for everyone." He reached into a slim Italian leather briefcase resting on the velvet bench beside him and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He didn't hand it to me. See, he slid it across the wine-stained tablecloth like a card player revealing a winning hand. I didn't open it. I didn't need to see the bold-faced font of the petition for dissolution of marriage. But as I looked at the envelope, I noticed a secondary set of documents peeking out: wire transfer confirmations and corporate restructuring forms. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a liquidation. "You think this is just about a legal separation?" I asked, my gaze shifting back to Elena. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. She was staring at the red wine stain as if it were a portal to another world. "I spoke to Marcus, Elena. My stagnant brain managed to find its way to a digital forensics expert. I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. Now I know about the consultancy fees you've been funneling from our joint retirement fund into Julian's shell company for the last 18 months. The silence that followed was absolute. The jazz trio had finished their set, and the only sound was the rain hitting the window and the frantic, shallow breathing of the woman I'd shared a bed with for over a decade. Julian's bored expression finally flickered. He hadn't expected the builder of cages to have a key to the digital locks. On Family Secrets and Revenge, we know that when the heart is betrayed, the ledger is usually the first place the evidence hides. To understand why this hit me with the force of a structural collapse, you have to understand what we survived together 5 years ago. My father, a man who smelled of machine oil and honest labor, Shito had passed away from a sudden heart attack. He left me a modest inheritance and the deed to a small family tool and die shop in South Boston. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a legacy of sweat and 3 generations of Miller men. When Elena convinced me that our horizons lay on the West Coast, I sold that shop. I sold my father's life's work and put every single penny into a joint investment account that was supposed to be our forever fund. I trusted her implicitly because she was the visionary. I gave her power of attorney while I was away at remote job sites for months at a time, building bridges that would stand for 100 years. I gave her my history, my father's sweat, and my complete, unvarnished faith. And as I sat at that table in the Gilded Rose, the realization settled into my marrow. She hadn't just been looking for a new spark or a younger, more dynamic partner. She had been harvesting me. She had been treating my life like a resource to be extracted until the mine was empty. Julian wasn't just a lover, he was a specialist in asset relocation. They hadn't just been waiting for the right emotional moment to leave, they were waiting for the final 20% of the South Boston sale to clear the holding account. "You're late, Julian," I said, leaning back in the chair. I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. When you realize you've already lost everything, the fear of losing goes away, replaced by a devastatingly sharp focus. "The transfer to the Aurelius Holdings account? When the one you had Elena scheduled for 4 p.m. this afternoon?" Julian's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on the strap of his briefcase. Elena finally looked up, her brow furrowed in confusion. "How do you know that name?" she whispered. "I flagged the account as fraudulent at 9 a.m. this morning," I replied, my voice gaining a rhythmic, engineering precision. "I provided the bank with the forensic trail Marcus pulled from your hidden cloud drive, Elena. As of 3 hours ago, those accounts are frozen, both of them. And because you used a corporate VPN from my home network to initiate the transfers, the FBI's Cyber Fraud Division has already opened an inquiry into Aurelius Holdings and its consultant, Mr. Julian Thorne." The panic that flared in Elena's eyes was the most honest thing I'd seen from her in years. It wasn't the panic of a woman losing a husband. It was the panic of a thief realizing the exit door is locked. Julian stood up abruptly, his sophisticated composure shattering like cheap glass. He didn't look like a seeker of horizons anymore. He looked like a common swindler looking for the nearest fire exit. The patrons of the Gilded Rose were no longer pretending not to listen. The unnoticed man had become the conductor of a very public, very expensive symphony of failure. Julian grabbed his briefcase, his face flushed a deep, angry purple. He leaned down and hissed something into Elena's ear. Not a word of comfort, but a snarl of blame. I caught the word idiot before he turned on his heel and strode toward the door, nearly knocking over a waiter carrying a tray of champagne. He didn't look back. He didn't offer her a hand. He left her there, sitting in the middle of a high-end bistro in a red dress she'd bought to celebrate her escape, with nothing but a wine-stained tablecloth and a husband who knew too much. Elena sat slumped, her shoulders shaking, but there were no tears, only the hollow, rattling breath of someone who had gambled and lost. "I did love you once," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the return of the jazz music. I stood up, slowly buttoning my charcoal coat, feeling the weight of the wedding ring in my pocket. Love doesn't require a shell company, Elena, and it certainly doesn't require a man like Julian. You didn't just leave me, you tried to erase me. I walked toward the door, the bell chiming my exit, leaving the check for the Pinot Noir on the table. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Edie, tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story and share your thoughts in the comments. The weeks that followed were a grueling marathon of depositions, bank statements, and fluorescent-lit rooms. I moved into a sparse one-bedroom apartment in downtown Seattle, leaving the Bellevue house behind. Every morning I would wake up and for a split second, I'd reach for her side of the bed, only to find the cold reality of my new life. But the grief was quickly replaced by the work. My lawyer, a shark of a woman named Sarah, sat me down and showed me the depths of the rabbit hole. Julian Thorne had a history. He targeted women in affluent, stable marriages, women who felt unseen or stagnant, and played the role of the adventurous soul who could liberate them. He'd done it in San Francisco, in Denver, and now in Seattle. But he'd never run into a structural engineer before. "He builds fantasies, David," Sarah told me, flipping through a stack of flagged emails. "But you build things that have to withstand reality. He never stood a chance once you started looking at the blueprints." We spent our nights tracing every penny, every fraudulent invoice, and every lie. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the integrity of my own history. If I let them steal my past, I'd have nothing to build my future on. On family secrets and revenge, we see that sometimes the hardest part of the fight isn't the confrontation. It's the long, quiet grind of taking back what belongs to you. During the grueling discovery phase of the trial, while my legal team was busy dissecting bank ledgers, I found myself tasked with clearing out the archives of our life in the Bellevue house. It was a haunting process, sorting through 15 years of shared history packed into cardboard boxes. In the back of a closet, hidden behind a stack of old architectural blueprints, I found a dust-covered cedar chest. Inside was a collection of Elena's personal effects from before we moved west. At the very bottom, tucked inside a silk scarf, I found a letter. It was yellowed with age, dated 12 years ago, just weeks after our wedding day. It was from her mother, a woman who had passed away shortly after we moved, leaving Elena with a sense of rootless ambition. The letter was a warning, written in a shaky, elegant hand. It said, "Don't let your father's hunger become your own, Elena. He spent his life looking for a shortcut to the top and died with nothing but debts and a bitter heart. A quiet life with a good man is a safe life. Don't trade a foundation for a mirage." I sat on the floor of that empty bedroom, the letter trembling in my hand. I realized then that I had never truly known the shadows Elena was running from. She hadn't just been bored, she was haunted by a generational fear of being ordinary or stagnant, as she had called me. To her, my stability wasn't a gift. It was a reminder of the quiet life her mother had praised and her father had despised. It didn't excuse the theft or the betrayal, but for a fleeting, painful moment, I felt a flicker of the man I used to be, the man who wanted to shield her from her own demons. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. Compassion in a courtroom is a structural weakness, and I couldn't afford to lean on it. We finally met for the execution of assets in a sterile, glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper I had helped survey years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Elena looked hollow. The vibrant, red-dressed woman from the bistro was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she'd been sleeping in her clothes. Julian Thorne was a ghost. The FBI had tracked his last known location to a regional airport in Montana before the trail went cold. He'd left her to face the wreckage alone. My lawyer, Sarah, laid out the terms with the cold efficiency of a guillotine. Because of the forensic evidence of the attempted wire fraud, The no-fault clause of our prenuptial agreement was voided. I wasn't just keeping the house. I was keeping the liquidated value of the South Boston shop, plus damages for the diverted consultancy fees. Elena pushed the heavy fountain pen toward me across the mahogany table. "Are you happy now, David?" she asked, her voice cracking like dry parchment. "You've stripped me of everything. You've won." I looked at the signature line, then at her. "Happy? No, Elena. You think this is a game with a scoreboard. I didn't want to win. I just wanted to live the life we promised each other." I signed the papers with a steady hand. The sound of the pen on the paper was the final stone being placed on a tomb. I stood up and walked out of the room without looking back. There is a specific kind of silence that follows a long war, a ringing in the ears that tells you the noise is finally over. But the landscape is forever changed. This moment, where David finally signs his life away to start over, it's a heavy one. If you've ever had to close a chapter that you thought would last forever, how did you find the strength to sign that final line? Let me know below. It's been exactly 1 year since that rainy night at the Gilded Rose. I'm no longer in the sprawling empty house in Bellevue. I moved back across the country, settling just outside of Boston, not far from the docks where my father's shop used to stand. I bought a smaller place, a fixer-upper with good bones and a solid granite foundation. It needs work, but that's the beauty of it. You can see where the repairs are made. I've opened a small boutique consulting firm. I don't design skyscrapers anymore. I specialize in historical restoration. I help people save old buildings that are leaning or cracking, showing them how to reinforce the structure without destroying the character. It's quiet work, and it's honest. Jasper, the golden retriever, seems to like the Atlantic breeze better than the Pacific rain. He's getting gray around the muzzle, and he moves a little slower, but he still watches the door for me every evening. I've learned that you can't always see the rot in a marriage until the weight of a crisis makes it lean. But I've also learned that human beings are the most resilient structures on Earth. We are built to survive the collapse. The materials I use to build my life now are different. They're tempered by the fire of betrayal and cooled by the reality of what people are capable of when they're hungry for horizons. I don't look for the perfect build anymore. I look for the one that can survive a storm. A few weeks ago, I received a notification from a private investigator I'd kept on retainer. It was a single digital photograph taken at a roadside diner outside of Reno, Nevada. In the grainy image, a woman was sitting at a Formica counter, staring into a cup of black coffee. It was Elena. She looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen her. She was working as a waitress, her hands, the hands that used to design luxury gardens, now carrying heavy trays of greasy food. There was no sign of Julian. He'd moved on to his next project, leaving her with the debt and the legal fallout of their failed heist. I stared at the photo for a long time, waiting for a surge of triumph, a feeling of justice-porn satisfaction. But all I felt was a dull, distant ache. She had traded a life built on granite for a dream built on sand. And the tide had finally come in. On Family Secrets and Revenge, we tell these stories not just to expose the darkness of those who cheat and steal, but to remind ourselves that we are the architects of our own disasters. She chose her blueprints, and I chose mine. I closed the laptop and went outside to sit on my porch. The air was salty and cold, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Tonight, I'm sitting on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the Atlantic in shades of bruised purple and gold. I have a new project, a community center for at-risk youth in the old neighborhood. It's a solid design, built with reinforced concrete and deep-set pilings. It's meant to be a sanctuary, a place where the foundation is guaranteed. I think back to that moment when I walked up to that table in Seattle, unnoticed and broken. I realize now that I wasn't just walking into a confrontation with a cheating wife. I was walking out of a cage of my own making. I had been a prisoner of my own refusal to see the truth. The truth, no matter how much it burns when it first touches your skin, is the only thing that can truly set you free. And as I sit here, listening to the waves hit the shore, I realize that I am finally, truly free. The silence isn't empty anymore. It's full of possibility. Thank you for staying with me through this long and difficult journey. Stories like David's serve as a powerful reminder that while revenge and justice can be a motivation, the ultimate victory isn't taking what's theirs. It's taking back what's yours, your peace, your integrity, and your future. Life has a way of balancing the scales, even when the weight feels unbearable. If this story touched you, or if you've ever found yourself standing in the shadows watching your own world change, please share your thoughts with us. We are a community here at Family Secrets and Revenge, and your stories of resilience and survival are what keep this channel alive. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video if you found value in David's journey. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the secrets that tear families apart, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new narration. We read every comment, and we appreciate every one of you who joins us in seeking the truth. Until next time, keep your foundation strong, your heart guarded, and your eyes wide open. Thank you for watching Family Secrets and Revenge.